Hi, I'm Amy at EuroLuxHome.com. Welcome back to YouTube. If you enjoy learning about European antiques, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and maybe even leave a comment. It really helps a small business. So today, I thought it would be really interesting to explore the veneering technique or style of veneering called parquetry. But let's start at the beginning. What is veneer? Well, veneer is the technique of taking very thin slices of wood and adhering them onto a substrate, such as solid wood. And any wood can be used as a veneer, but it's mostly rare or exotic woods that are used to create a beautiful aesthetic appearance. And throughout history, veneering has been associated with very high quality. And that's because it was made for the aristocracy, the royalty, the very wealthy. And that's because it required extreme craftsmanship and very high quality materials. And that's why I always say veneer is not a dirty word. Now, if you have always thought veneer was not desirable, well, go find my video called Why Veneer is Not a Dirty Word, and I'll tell you all about it. So when we look specifically at parquetry, it's good to start with the root word parquet, which is the French word that means small component, because parquetry is the art of arranging strips of wood into a mosaic to create a geometric pattern. And the artisan can use the wood grain and the color and the texture of the different woods to create a beautiful aesthetic appearance. So the history of veneer goes all the way back to Egypt. But when we're talking specifically about parquetry, well, that started at the end of the 17th century in France at the Palace of Versailles. You see, Louis XIV had marble floors throughout the palace. And in order to keep marble floors clean, you need a whole lot of water. And over time, it was found that all of that water was beginning to damage the floor joists. And so they had to figure out, how can we still have beautiful, gorgeous floors, but without using a material that requires so much water? Well, in 1684, André Lenotte, who was actually the principal gardener at Versailles, came up with the idea of taking strips of wood and arranging them into intersecting box-like patterns, and that became known as Parquet de Versailles, or the Versailles pattern. And it was used all throughout Versailles, most notably in the Hall of Mirrors, that great big long room, completely decked out with mirrors on the walls, sparkling chandeliers above, and Louis XIV and all of the noblemen would parade up and down the hallway looking at themselves and admiring their status and wealth. But it was also used in the bedroom of the king, in the private quarters of the queen, in the peace room, and other areas of the palace. So once parquetry was invented, craftsmen began to compete to create more and more elaborate geometric patterns. And so while the Versailles pattern is probably the most famous parquetry pattern, you may be familiar with other patterns such as chevron or herringbone that come together at right angles, creating sort of a zigzag pattern. And so parquetry became synonymous with opulence and grandeur, and it spread throughout Europe. And throughout the 18th century, all of the wealthy and aristocracy wanted to have parquetry floors because it was very labor intensive, and so became a status symbol. So much so that today, if you travel in Europe and you go to some of the famous home museums, or you stay in grand hotels, you will notice those amazing geometric patterns on the parquetry floors. Now, parquetry wasn't only used on floors, most famously on floors, but parquetry began to be used on furniture. And that was mostly used on the tops of tables, tops of sideboards, and most notably on beds, on the headboards and footboards. Now, the most famous parquetry floor, at least in the US, is found in Boston. And if you're an NBA fan, then you probably know I'm talking about where the Boston Celtics play. Even Larry Bird himself says the parquetry floor is the symbol of the Boston Celtics. So why do the Boston Celtics have a parquetry floor? Well, it all stems back to the fact that the floor was built in 1946, right at the end of World War II. And building materials just were not readily available. So the floor company came up with the idea of gathering up scraps of wood, laying them into a geometric pattern, and that's why the Boston Celtics were the first NBA team to play on a parquetry floor. Now, you may be familiar with another veneering technique called marquetry, but marquetry is different than parquetry. Marquetry is taking little small pieces and assembling them together to make an image or a picture, whereas parquetry uses little small pieces or scraps of wood put together into a mosaic to create a geometric pattern for a beautiful aesthetic appearance. I hope you enjoyed learning all about parquetry. Be sure to come back next week and we'll explore marquetry. In the meantime, like this video, subscribe, and maybe even share it with a friend. See you next time.